From the heart of South Asia to the crossroads of Central Asia, from the turbulent Middle East and North Africa to the power corridors of the West, where narratives collide, perspectives matter, and stories connect. This is Beyond Borders. I am Umar Khalid Butt. During the course of the show, we'll bring you stories from across the world in a world that we believe exists without borders and boundaries, and bring you stories that matter in this changing world. We'll begin with what we call the top stories of the day, or in our own words, region lines. We start from South Asia, where a Dhaka court awards the death sentence and life imprisonment to former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina on charges of crimes against humanity and violent crackdown on student-led protests in Bangladesh last year. Moving on to the Middle East, Israeli attacks kill at least 3 more Palestinians in Gaza as thousands endure heavy flooding and worsening conditions amid the fragile ceasefire. Meanwhile, ahead of a UN Security Council vote on Trump's Gaza peace plan, frustrated Israel tries to water down US-sponsored resolution. In the West, Pakistan's Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Ishaq is in Moscow to lead the Pakistani delegation at the SCO Council of Heads of Government meeting that begins in Russia today. Ishaq will hold bilateral meetings with the SCO leaders on the sidelines of the 2-day meeting. And lastly, the US military deploys an aircraft carrier to the Caribbean Sea to strengthen its anti-narcotics campaign, a move that is likely to anger Venezuela. Meanwhile, US forces strike another alleged drug boat in the Eastern Pacific, killing at least 3 people. Let's begin with the top story of the day, and that concerns Bangladesh. Now, a Bangladeshi war crimes court has sentenced ousted Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to death on Monday, concluding a months-long trial that found her guilty of ordering a deadly crackdown on a student-led uprising last year. Now, the ruling is the most dramatic legal action against a former Bangladeshi leader in decades and comes months ahead of parliamentary elections that are expected to be held in early February. Tonight, Bangladesh stands at a defining crossroad, the long-awaited conviction of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina Wajid that has triggered intense debate at home and across the region for years. Rights groups have accused her government of centralizing power, silencing dissent, and weakening democratic institutions. Today's verdict is being seen by many as a moment of accountability after a decade that was marked by enforced disappearances, media crackdowns, and political intolerance. But what does this ruling mean for Bangladesh's future, and how will it reshape regional dynamics in South Asia? We unpack the national and regional implications with our show tonight, and the first segment, that is on Bangladesh. We'll begin with it, and we have with us in the studios Dr. Saad Khan, who is an international political analyst. Thank you very much, Dr. Saad, to have joined us. And online, we'll be joined by Sumon, who's a rights activist who joins us from Dhaka. Sumon, thank you very much to have joined us as well. Before we go to the questions, let's show you a short video package that our team has prepared.
A special tribunal in Dhaka has sentenced Bangladesh's deposed Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to death after finding her guilty of crimes against humanity for ordering a deadly crackdown on last year's student-led uprising. The International Crimes Tribunal ruled that Hasina authorized the use of drones, helicopters, and live ammunition against protesters during the August-July revolution, which ultimately toppled her 15-year rule. The court convicted her on multiple counts, including incitement, issuing orders to kill, and failing to prevent atrocities, describing the violence as widespread, systematic, and directed at civilians. Former Home Minister Asaduzzaman Khan was also handed a death sentence. Hasina, who fled to India in August 2024 and was tried in absentia, condemned the verdict as politically motivated and engineered by an unelected interim government. Following the ruling, the Bangladesh Foreign Ministry issued a strong statement calling on the Indian government to immediately hand over Hasina and former Interior Minister Kamal. Authorities in Dhaka have tightened security, deploying police, army, and paramilitary units amid a surge in crude bomb attacks and arson incidents. Moments before the verdict was announced, an explosive device was hurled near the tribunal, prompting immediate lockdown measures. The UN estimates that up to 1,400 people were killed during the uprising, the country's worst episode of political violence in decades. Families of the victims welcomed the judgment, calling it long-awaited justice. As Bangladesh prepares for elections in early February, with the Awami League barred from contesting, tensions are expected to escalate further. Hasina's supporters have vowed mass agitation, while her son has declared that the family intends to fight back by whatever means necessary.
Let's begin with this question answer session with our guest from Dhaka and our guest from Pakistan. So we'll begin with our guest from Dhaka. Solyman, thank you very much to have joined us. In your point of view concerning this latest decision that has been taken, to what extent does Hasina Wajid's conviction validate the long-standing concerns about authoritarianism, political repression and institutional manipulation during her years in power?
Actually, the conviction of Sheikh Hasina strongly validates the long-standing concerns that activists, civil society members, journalists, and international human rights organizations have raised over the years. Her governance increasingly took an authoritarian shape. Power was centralized to an unusual degree. Accountability was minimized and state institutions were systematically weakened to serve political interest, only her interest, her party interest. For years, we said that enforced disappearances were real, that opposition's voices were silenced, that students were being monitored, and many dismissed these concerns as exaggeration or politically motivated allegations. But the tribunal's verdict confirms that these actions were not isolated. They were part of a broader political culture where dissent was treated as a threat, and the state machinery was used to suppress it. This verdict shows that the authoritarian tendencies we criticized were not imagined. They were institutionalized and eventually deadly. You know, Sheikh Hasina also given her statements in many journalists like Hindustan Times and BBC and India Today. She used to say that she did not do any guilty. She is not guilty, but she is not committing her crime yet. So actually, for me, this is a light punishment. I think this is a light punishment for a bigger crime, for a capital crime. So unfortunately, this is the highest crime. This is the highest punishment in our country. So we had to rely on it.
Solyman, how did Hasina's governance style, whether it be centralized decision-making, crackdown on opposition and misuse of the DSA, contribute to the political instability that Bangladesh is facing today?
Hasina's governance was rooted in centralization of power, intolerance of opposition, and excessive use of state force. This became even clearer during the Digital Security Act era, when online expression became criminalized. The digital security was used to target students, used to target cartoonists. There is a cartoonist, Kishore, and also his friend also died in jail. Journalists also, many journalists and ordinary citizens also. Whoever dared to express dissatisfaction, she used to target them. I can actually say one of my friends, he was a Quran Hafiz. He used to teach Quran to children. When once a microbus came to him and took him, nobody knew where he was for the 6 or 7 months. After that, he came out. He said, like a toilet. He was in a toilet. Just he cannot sleep. He was just half sleep, like used to just sit and used to sleep. And he prayed there, he eat there for 7 months, and then he got out because nothing found on him. So it happened.
All right, things like that have happened, but now that the trend is of course changing with this conviction, let's see where things go as far as Bangladesh is concerned. Dr. Saad, in your assessment, did the state institutions under Hasina Wajid become too politicized, and does this conviction now going to herald a change within the institutions in Bangladesh?
Yes, of course, because I think this is the first time that the impunity with which certain political parties, including Awami League of Sheikh Hasina, used to manipulate power, used to terrorize people, used to employ all the state institutions as personal fiefdoms, will be questioned for times to come. Because this so-called International Criminal Court was created by Sheikh Hasina herself based on a 1975 or 1974 law, in which she targeted the leaders of all opposition parties for crimes against humanity. Several persons from Jamaat-e-Islami, a leading politician and ex-speaker from Bangladesh Nationalist Party, were actually hanged. And now this court has come back to actually try her crimes against humanity. Because what was done in July of 2024 was not merely police violence, it was a calculated campaign of terror against their own citizens. It was a mass murder of students, most of them unarmed, almost all of them unarmed. And I think a full stop had to be put to it. And finally, the same court which she used against her political rivals has sentenced her to death, has sentenced her interior minister, Asaduzzaman Kamal, to death, has sentenced the then police chief, Abdullah al-Mamun, to long years in prison. And if these sentences are actually carried out the way she carried out against her opponents, I think only then justice would be served. Because as we know, there is a treaty of extradition between India and Bangladesh in place. So technically speaking, India cannot refuse to hand her back to the government of Bangladesh to face justice, just like they used to hand over the people whom she wanted to be hanged back in Bangladesh. So I think better sense will prevail even in New Delhi, that once a legitimate court within Bangladesh has sentenced her, she should come back and face justice.
All right, but this is another question altogether, whether she will ultimately return to Bangladesh and be ready to face justice. That is a huge question mark as far as that is concerned. How much did Hasina Wajid's confrontational politics, completely isolate Bangladesh diplomatically? And do you feel now that this conviction has been taken, do you feel it will pave the road for a more balanced and principled engagement?
Of course, yes. Because she was isolated for a number of reasons. I mean, all the international human rights agencies raised issues about enforced disappearances, continuous torture like our friend from Bangladesh just narrated about his friend, crimes against humanity. Then there was a problem of freedom of press, freedom of judiciary. Independence of institutions, including the armed forces and police, which were actually used by her as party stalwarts to tackle or target the opposition. So I think all of these things and massive corruption. Anybody who was affiliated to the ruling party could make fortunes, and that happened for the past 12, 13 years. And I think all these things had totally isolated her, but for New Delhi, except for New Delhi. I think her style of autocratic governance did not win her friends anywhere, neither in Beijing nor in Washington DC, nor anywhere else.
But lot of friends in India.
Lots of friends in India,
and that continue to harbor her, they continue to shield her even under these situations. We've also been joined by Ahmer Bilal Soofi Saab. He is an international law expert. Ahmer Bilal Soofi Saab, thank you very much to have joined us. Now, how do you see this conviction? Now, given the UN report that up to 1,400 people have been killed during the 2024 student-led protests, how significant is today's death sentence in terms of accountability for what has been described as the worst violence in decades?
Thank you very much. I think it is very clear that under the law of Bangladesh, this tribunal was set up, and that tribunal was set up under a federal law of the government of Bangladesh. That federal law itself defines what constitutes war crime as per the definition of the government and people of Bangladesh. Now, this particular tribunal found that the acts that were committed by Hasina Wajid or under her command constituted war crimes. And they were crimes or they were definitely offenses under the statute that Bangladesh had introduced. They were able to identify, frame charges, and undertake process of trial properly and come to an informed conclusion in a 400 plus page judgment. I am yet to exactly examine it in its entirety, but the bits and pieces one is able to scan are very clear that imputability of the conduct is self-evident and makes the actions that she authorized as serious offenses, and hence she had to face this conviction. Whether they would be viewed as war crimes by an international tribunal is something different, and we need not go down that route. But the case law or the judgments apparently relied upon in 400 plus page judgment seem to refer to some international precedents, including the one relating to Yugoslavia War Crimes Tribunal and acts in the Rwanda War Crimes Tribunal as well. So I believe this is a judgment which has been handed down by a tribunal which has functioned under the law that was enacted by the government of Bangladesh. Although the context then was different, under the same law, unfortunately, certain trials of those who had supported Pakistan in 1971 were also tried. The people who were part of Jamaat Islami then, the very age, and at that point in time, the objection was that this law cannot have retrospective application. Whereas in the case of Hasina Wajid, this retrospectivity issue is not even there. The trials, the actions that were on which the charges were framed were conducted during the duration of the pendency of this law.
All right. Ahmer, Bilal, Soofi Saab, in the light of this heavy security, recent bomb attacks, warnings from Hasina Wajid supporters, what risks does Bangladesh now face in terms of unrest, governance, public confidence in state institutions, as well as the enforcement of this conviction that has been now given to Hasina Wajid? Can this conviction also be challenged in international courts?
I do not think so. Okay, there is a direct hierarchy of challenge in the international court. As far as its enforcement is concerned, that will come later, because for that one is required to have the accused present in the territorial jurisdiction of Bangladesh. Now, given the fact that she is in India, and although there is an extradition treaty with India, but nevertheless, my own sense is the Indian government will heavily rely on the political persecution exception under the extradition law to decline any request for extradition. So while the judgment is there, it is an indictment on the way she conducted herself, but its implementation will obviously take much more time. And the fact that she has chosen to be given refuge by the Indian side demonstrates that she and her actions were fully supported by the Indian government as well.
All right. Thank you very much, Ahmer, Bilal, Soofi Saab, to have joined us and to have given us your very eminent point of view as far as what are the legal ramifications of this conviction is concerned. Last question from you, Solyman. Sumon, I'd like to understand, looking ahead, what safeguards do you believe are necessary to ensure stability, rights protection and public confidence in Bangladesh following this conviction?
Well, looking at Bangladesh needs strong safeguards to ensure true stability. Firstly, I'll say institutional reform. In institutional reform, if we rebuild the independence of the judiciary, police, and civil services, then we can ensure, and then also reformation of laws, legal reform, reappealing or revising repressive laws like Digital Security Act to guarantee freedom of speech. It is already removed from the institution constitution already. Protection of dissent, ensuring that no citizen is targeted for political views. So we already ensured that one also. You know, we are going to have a referendum in our election time also. So there will be vote yes or no. If it is yet yes, then it will be automatically will be added with our constitution. If it is not, then the next political party who will be in ruling position, they will decide whether they can do it or not. It will be on their will. So we are going to have. Previously, we used to have only one parliament. Now we are going to have two parliament, the upper parliament and the lower one also. So this is for only safety for the constitutions and also our transitional justice. We have to establish truth commissions to document the abuses and provide reparations also. And we have to make sure that there will be a free and fair elections, not like the Hasina regime what she did before her time. So with credible oversight and transparency, we have to make sure that also, and national reconciliation, healing the trauma of victim and restoring public trust. We have to work on it more, and also most importantly, the international partnership. Uh, Previously, we used to not have that much international partnership. Only we had to rely on only just one country, India, because that party just party used to tell us that only India is our friend, India is our friend, and the other country we did not have that good relationship. So we have to make sure that our international partnership will regain receiving technical support
How
from.
that international partnership also regains, as you yourself said. Stay with us. Dr. Saad, how do you see this decision that has been taken in Bangladesh? How is this being seen by the world in your point of view?
I think other than India, most of the world would take it as an excellent decision. I think the crimes against humanity committed by the Awami League regime during Sheikh Hasina's stint at the helm are well documented. The international credible newspapers and journals like The Economist, New York Times, BBC, which is a channel, have documented it so much that it would have been a surprise if she had been acquitted. If she had been acquitted, probably this would not have gone well with the world community, and question would have been raised on the fairness of the proceedings of International Criminal Tribunal. But now I think there would be a wide acceptability of the decision, except in some countries in European Union, etc., which are in principle against death penalty, not because they don't think she committed crimes, but other than that, I think it would have wide acceptability within Bangladesh and outside.
All right. Solyman, last question from you. I'd like to understand, how does the Gen Z that started the whole uprising last year, how does it see this conviction of Hasina Wajid?
Actually, well, what we did and today's verdict was came out. Today's verdict actually it is not the end of our story. It is the beginning of a new chapter. So we have to utilize it. It is just a reminder that justice, even if delayed, can still rise. But it also places responsibility on us. Like Gen Z, you called us Gen Z, activists, also the citizens, the leaders, all of us, to build a better future where such tragedy can never happen again. So we have to make sure that.
Thank you very much, Sumon, to have joined us all the way from Dhaka, to have given us the Bangladeshi perspective on how this conviction is being seen and what will be the repercussions of this as well. We'd also like to thank, as far as this segment is concerned, Saad Khan Sahab, you remain with us for the next segment as well. Let's take you now to the Middle East and North Africa. Now, there's a decision that is being put at the United Nations Security Council as far as the peace plan that was propagated and put forward and pushed by Donald Trump. Now, this is a very important time for the UNSC, because if they accept it, this paves the way for the proper enforcement of this peace plan. Now, Israel does not want that. It is trying its level best in order to somehow, somewhere undermine this very peace plan. Will it be able to do so or not is the question that everybody has on their own minds. Nevertheless, we can see that the peace plan has gone through, and Donald Trump has also managed to persuade or pressurize Israel, whatever, how you may put it, in order to go forth with this peace plan. But of course, we all know that Israel is trying its level best so that some kind of pause comes as far as the future of this peace plan is concerned. We continue to be joined by Saad Khan to discuss this very important issue as well. Saad, Israel's refusal to acknowledge Palestinian statehood, doesn't it undermine its own claims that it supports peace, especially when Russia's rival resolution calls for a contiguous Palestinian state?
Of course it does, because even the almost daily attacks on Palestinians, even after the so-called ceasefire, in which several hundred, probably 260 or 270 people have already lost their lives much after the ceasefire. Those people who were waiting for the stop of hostilities and the stoppage of bombing are seeing their loved ones killed every day, day in and day out. Refusal to have a two-state solution means that there would be continued antagonism between Palestinians and Israelis, and it can again spark another war, maybe 10 years, 20 years down the road. Because in the region which is now Palestine and Israel, the population of Israelis and Palestinians is almost equal. There are about 2.2 million people in Gaza, there were 2.7 million people in the West Bank, and about 2 million of 9 million Israeli citizens are of Palestinian descent. So it's 7 million. And if you think that half of the people could coexist with you peacefully without their own state, without their own identity, without self-determination and without sovereignty, that's a tall order. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't make any logical sense. So I think whatever Israel is doing, it is undermining its own long-term stability, and it also contradicts its own claims to have peace in the region, because peace on Israeli terms means that the Israelis would always be the dominating or colonizing or imperial force, and the Palestinians would always be underdogs. That is not how international relations works.
But so unfortunately, there are always exceptions, and we see the exception in this case, at least in the Middle East, when it comes to Palestine.
That's true, absolutely true. But I'm hopeful by the new wording that has been included in the draft resolution that is going to be voted in the UN Security Council at 5 p.m. Eastern time, New York time, which is about a few hours from now, about 3 a.m. Pakistani time in the night. Now finally, the words that there would be a pathway towards Palestinian statehood. At least this word, which does not guarantee a Palestinian state, but it hopes that once stability is there and once violence ends, there would be, and rebuilding starts, there would be a pathway. At least this is much more than what Mr. Netanyahu would have wanted, because in the previous 4 drafts of this resolution, Israel had been successful, in having no reference to Palestinian statehood, but then it came to the fore that probably then the resolution would not be carried. So finally, a very vague statement, but that refers to potential future Palestinian statehood has now been added, and I hope there is a large chance that it will get the necessary 9 votes out of 15, which are required for resolution to be carried. And I also hope that probably Russia and China would not vote for it, but would not veto it either, because there is a parallel Russian resolution as well, which strongly calls for a parallel Palestinian state, contiguous Palestinian state.
That is what I referred to.
Yeah, that's what you referred to. But even then, they are not going to veto it, because that's the only hope for a lasting peace if the plan is sanctioned by UN Security Council resolution. Otherwise, it's a plan by one member state of the UN, that's the United States. Once it has the stamp of approval from the Security Council, at least it would be, legally difficult for Israel to wriggle its way out of its obligations in the said resolution.
Will Israel manage to remove those references to Palestinian statehood that reflect a continued effort to deny Palestinians their internationally recognized right to self-determination?
No, I don't think that they would be able to remove those references, because those references were in 1948 resolution as well, just after the war of 1948 between Israel and Palestine, which gave the UN partition plan, and again the resolution after the 1967 war, and at least in 9 separate resolutions thereafter. The issue is not that whether they would be able to, eliminate those references or not. The issue is, even when the references are there, even then they to continue to violate those UN Security Council resolutions without any penalty, without any adverse consequences for them. So resolution would be there, I hope so. But the real challenge is not to have that resolution. The real challenge is that this time to make sure that Israelis cannot, violate that resolution with impunity. And that would be the challenge, because there are several other international law. For example, you cannot, forcibly displace a population, you cannot attack civilian population under the Geneva Convention, and
that is what they have been doing.
They have been continue to do even today. That's true. That's absolutely true. So the challenge is the implementation, not exactly the wording. Wording has been watered down significantly, but the reference to statehood in vague terms would continue in the resolution.
How important is the whole legitimacy of the UN process for this specific resolution?
Actually, I think UN should have or could have more legitimacy if they use the same terminology that were used against the Serbs after the genocide in Srebrenica during the Bosnian War, and about the genocide in Rwanda, because what happened was a genocide of Palestinians. So if there is no reference to bring the perpetrators of genocide to justice, just like there was a special UN tribunal on war crimes for Rwanda and a separate war crime tribunal for Bosnia and Herzegovina, I think sooner or later the UN would have to consider there has to be a special war crimes tribunal, especially for the crimes committed against humanity in Gaza. And that's what International Criminal Court has decided. They have issued arrest warrants of Netanyahu and his defense minister as well. So now whether they committed crimes against humanity is not in dispute. International Court of Justice has held that. International Criminal Court, which is a separate court than ICJ, has held that. And I think the court of the public opinion of the world is more or less unanimous on the point that Israel has committed crimes against humanity. So not only justice for the living Palestinians, but justice for those Palestinians who have died should also be there. Just like we were discussing earlier in the earlier segment, that those 1,400 people massacred in Bangladesh, at least this death sentence has given a sense of justice to them. True. So if there is a war crimes case against Israel and that is allowed to proceed, and that cannot proceed without UN Security Council resolution, without the force of UN Security Council resolution behind it, it would mean that UN is also selective and,
But Dr. Saad, you talk about the enforcement of the United Nations resolutions. We all know the number of times the United Nations has moved to stop Israel from perpetrating the genocide that it has been perpetrating since the last few months or years, let's put it that way. It hasn't stopped. In fact, what Israel has done, it has openly put the blame game on Antonio Guterres as well, amongst others. The resolutions by the ICC, ICJ have had no implication whatsoever on Israel. Will this United Nations Security Council resolution, if it's passed, have any effect whatsoever?
Of course, it will have some effect, but as you have rightly mentioned, that whenever there is a UN Human Rights Council resolution, when there is an international court, or International Criminal Court subpoena, or any other thing, they just ignore it and they prove that this is anti-Semitic and that it is anti-Israel and things like that. I think it will no UN resolution would be without any implication, because otherwise the countries would not be trying to push through a UN resolution, and each comma and each sentence, each word, there is a lot of debate behind it. So one cannot say that the impact of a UN resolution can be zero. It will have some impact, of course, but how much? And that is the question.
Exactly.
So what we have to try is that the UN resolution is implemented in a way that the rebuilding starts as early as possible, that a stabilization force is there practically on the ground, the boots on the ground, as soon as possible. Because then Israeli bombing would, they would know that then some peacekeepers might be killed, because the bombs make no distinction when they are being, thrown from the air. So I think if the resolution implementation is somehow sped up, the neutral Palestinian government, the establishment of the Board of Peace headed by the President of the United States, the boots on ground, about 20,000 troops from willing countries to be there, then maybe we will see the dawn of a new era. It would be slow, it would be painful, but better than what was happening for the past 2 years, a general massacre.
But of course, a lot of efforts have been put by US President Donald Trump in order to make this ceasefire a reality. And we've been joined by Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt, who was the former US Assistant Secretary of State and former US Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs. Thank you very much, General Mark, to have joined us. General Mark, I'd like to understand how important has been the strong support that this 20-point ceasefire agreement between Hamas and Israel is, as far as a US point of view is concerned, and how important will be the continued support of the US leadership in order to make this ceasefire agreement a reality?
Well, I think the support of the United States is the only thing that is keeping Israel at the table and willing to, at least on paper, abide by the resolution. The problem we have is that the other parties to the agreement, primarily Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey.
All right. Mark, I'd also like to understand that this whole situation, when there's a resolution that is going to be passed by the United Nations Security Council in a few hours from now, how important is it also going to be for the US as far as continued backing of this is concerned? There's some technical issue with Mark Kimmitt, so we'll go back to Saad. Dr. Saad, how important will be the US backing? As I was asking Mark Kimmitt, how important will be the US backing and support for this resolution and post this acceptance of resolution or passage of resolution by the UNSC?
I think that would be the sole, if not the sole, then the principal defining parameter of whether that resolution will be implemented or not. I think to this extent I agree with General Mark that if Israel is on the table, it's only because of the pressure of President Trump. And I don't think that Russians or Chinese or French or UK, the other 4 members of the veto club, have that much influence and leverage over the Israeli government or Israel as a state to make sure that they remain on the negotiating table and whatever is agreed there, they are made to adhere to it. So that's very important, I think, the US role.
All right, but in your point of view, this whole UNSC resolution is going to be very important. Whether it passes is going to lay down a new era or maybe a new chapter as far as the Middle East is concerned, or its future.
Of course it will be. However, as many analysts have been saying in the past 20-30 days, because that the peace plan itself was somewhat lopsided in favor of Israel. For example, it talks about the disarming of the Palestinian security force, which is Hamas, but it does not talk about, complete withdrawal of Israeli security forces or disarming of Israeli security forces. It talks about the release of all living prisoners that were with the Palestinian, 20 of them. But it did not talk about the relief of all Palestinians detainees with Israel. Only 2,200 out of 11,000 or so were released. So even the wording is, I think, somewhat derogatory. The prisoners with Israel are called hostages. The prisoners with the...
So a lot of ambiguity, but nevertheless, this whole act of passage of this bill is going to be extremely important in the UNSC. So let's look forward in these next couple of hours, whether and how it passes and what will be the aftermath of that for Israel, for Palestinians, for the Middle East, and for peace in the region, as it is extremely important under the current circumstances, and millions of people are looking forward to this as a news chapter. Thank you very much, Dr. Saad Khan, to have joined us. Let's now take you to the West. Now, the Pentagon has confirmed that US forces have conducted another strike on a specific drug trafficking vessel in the Eastern Pacific that has resulted in around 3 fatalities. According to the US Southern Command, intelligence indicated the vessel was transporting narcotics across a known smuggling route into international waters. President Donald Trump also has indicated that the United States may open discussions with the Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, even as Washington continues to increase military pressure on the region and continues and conducts strikes on suspected drug trafficking vessels. There's a lot of tension, but there's also hope at the end of the day. Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs, continues to join us. Thank you very much, General Mark, to have joined us. General Mark, how do you interpret U.S. President Donald Trump's indication that the U.S. might open talks with Nicolas Maduro at a time when Washington is at the same time or simultaneously also increasing military pressure in the region?
Well, I think that's exactly the way this campaign should be worked out, a combination of economic pressure, diplomatic pressure, and military pressure. Nicolas Maduro is a dictator. He is a strong man. He is not going to simply be persuaded to end his drug activities by the use of diplomats in white shoes talking to his people. It takes more than that.
General Mark, I'd also like to understand what implications does the U.S. designation of the Cartel de las Soles as a foreign terrorist organization have for diplomatic, for legal and security dynamics between Washington and Caracas, in your point of view?
Well, in my point of view, it means that those terrorists are now subject to rules and regulations and policies that we have against terrorist organizations versus criminal organizations. Yes, we'd like to put them in jail, but they are considered a threat. And because they're considered a threat, not simply a criminal, it is possible to take more severe actions against those groups and the people inside of them.
All right. Mark, I'd also like to understand how important is the deployment of additional U.S. troops and Marines in the Caribbean under the current circumstances. How do you see that from a strategic point of view?
Well, from a strategic point of view, I think it sends to President Maduro a message that the United States has the capability to use ground troops against his drug organizations and his drug transport networks. Now, whether that capability will be used or not is a completely different topic, but it does demonstrate that we have troops, Marines in the area ready to go.
All right. General Mark, with public support for unilateral military action relatively low, in your point of view, how might the U.S. policymakers balance domestic opinion, regional stability, and counter narcotics objectives moving forward?
You know, that's a very interesting question. And most people, most countries don't understand how you can have low public opinion, but a president that is still pursuing these types of policies. Our Constitution sets up that authority in the president and not in Congress, the parliament, simply because our founders understood that if you put military action up to a vote, it rarely, if ever, would be approved. So we give that prerogative to the president, who is the ultimate guarantor of security and has the responsibility for the security of the United States. So I don't see that necessarily as a contradiction. You'll rarely get United States population in favor of war. The last time Congress, who does have the authority to declare war, invoked that authority and responsibility was in 1941. So I think that's appropriate to separate this notion of popular support versus action by the president.
I'd like to repeat another question that I asked a bit before. By designating Cartel de los Soles as a foreign terrorist organization, based on allegations Maduro denies, is the U.S. creating a legal pretext for more aggressive military action against or inside of Venezuela?
Well, I don't necessarily think it means it will be used as a pretext, but what it does is it allows it to use, that now has the ability, the capability, and the authority to go in on the ground. Going against drug trafficking boats in international waters is one set of authorities, but when you now put American troops on sovereign territory, it has to be with another authority. And foreign terrorist organization designation means that the United States is willing and authorized to go after terrorists wherever they reside.
All right, thank you so very much, Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs, to have joined us and to have exclusively talked to us about the U.S. influence and how the U.S. intends to take its strategic influence forward in this very region. Thank you very much, sir, to have joined us.
Thank you.
Let's now take you to our last story, and that concerns the SCO summit that opens in Moscow to discuss the regional economic situation. And of course, our Pakistani side is being represented by the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar Saab, who is going to this meeting of the Council of Heads of Government of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. At the invitation of the Russian Prime Minister, His Excellency Mr. Mikhail Mishustin, the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Pakistan, will lead this delegation to this meeting, which is being held today and tomorrow in Moscow in Russia. This meeting will be attended by the heads of government of Belarus, China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, Vice President of Iran and Foreign Ministers of Pakistan and India. The heads of government of Mongolia, Bahrain, Egypt, Qatar, Kuwait, Turkmenistan and head of international and regional organizations will also be participating in this very important summit. And as you know, the SCO continues to remain a very important forum to discuss matters that pertain to this region and beyond. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to an end of today's Beyond Borders. As we have shown you in this program as well, and we continue to do so, we bring you stories from across borders in a world we designate without boundaries and borders, and of course, bringing you stories that matter in this changing world. And we'll continue to do that as the days pass by. See you tomorrow, inshallah. Allah Hafiz.